In 1970, Ford built a family car with more in common with NASCAR than the school run. In 1969, Ford built a car with a nose that came straight from a wind tunnel. They only made 750 of them, and they were designed for one reason: to win NASCAR races at 200 miles per hour. The car was called the Torino Talladega. Then Ford looked at what they had learned, hired the man who designed the Corvette Stingray, and built something even more radical for 1970. The result was a family car. It was also, secretly, one of the most aerodynamically engineered machines Ford ever put on American roads, and almost nobody knows it existed. The war nobody was talking about. To understand why Ford built the 1970 Torino the way they did, you have to understand the war. By the late 1960s, NASCAR had stopped being about horsepower and started being about air. The super speedways at Daytona Beach and Talladega, Alabama, were long, fast ovals where a car spent more time above 180 miles per hour than it did in a corner. And at those speeds, the shape of the car mattered as much as the engine inside it. Chrysler had figured this out first. The Dodge Charger 500, introduced in 1969, was a specifically engineered aerodynamic variant of the standard Charger, and it was still not enough. Chrysler built the Dodge Charger Daytona next, with a nose cone that extended 2 feet beyond the standard body and a rear wing tall enough to stand under, producing a car that was clocked at over 200 miles per hour at Talladega and left everything else on the superspeedway behind. Ford had been losing this war on the aerodynamic front, and the people running the company knew it. The man tasked with doing something about it was Bunky Knudsen, Ford's newly arrived general manager, who had recently jumped ship from General Motors. Knudsen had spent his career building performance cars at GM, and he understood exactly what the aerodynamic war was going to require. He turned to the Holman Moody Race Shop, Ford's primary partner in NASCAR competition, and gave them a specific problem to solve. Take the Ford Torino and make it more slippery through the air than anything Chrysler could put on the track. The Talladega, a family car built as a weapon. The result of that collaboration was the 1969 Ford Torino Talladega, and calling it a family car is technically accurate in the most misleading possible way. The Talladega was a modified version of the standard Ford Torino, which was itself a mid-sized family sedan available in 4-door, wagon, hardtop, and fastback configurations. Ford built it in those configurations because millions of Americans needed practical, affordable transportation, and the Torino delivered exactly that across a range of engine and trim options. But NASCAR homologation rules required that a minimum of 500 street-legal production examples of any modified car be built before it could legally race. Ford needed to sell a modified Torino to the public, so they did. The Talladega's aerodynamic modifications were surgical and deliberate. The standard Torino had a fashionable insert grille and recessed headlights, a design that looked handsome in a dealership, but performed badly in a wind tunnel. Ford replaced this with a nose section that extended the car's length by approximately 6 inches, with a flush-mounted grille on a more aerodynamic front end. The bumper at the front was actually a rear bumper from a different Ford model, cut down, narrowed, bent into a V-shape, and filled at the ends to create a crude but effective air dam. One of the most quietly clever engineering decisions on the entire car was the treatment of the rocker panels. Ford reshaped and rolled them so that NASCAR teams could run their racing cars approximately an inch closer to the ground than the rules would normally permit, which improved top speed measurably while remaining technically within the regulations. The production Talladegas were all powered by the 428 Cobra Jet V8, producing 335 horsepower. The racing cars used the Boss 429 engine after it was homologated separately through the Mustang. Ford built approximately 750 Talladegas in total, and the car did exactly what it was designed to do. David Pearson won the 1969 NASCAR Drivers' Championship in a Talladega. Ford won 26 of 54 Grand National races that year and took the Manufacturers' Championship. The Torino Talladega was, by the only measure that mattered, a complete success. Chrysler strikes back, and Ford calls Larry Shinoda. Then Chrysler unleashed the Plymouth Superbird for 1970, a car so extreme that it had a nose cone grafted onto the front of a Roadrunner, a rear wing standing 2 feet off the trunk lid, and a price tag that required Richard Petty to personally endorse the model before NASCAR fans would agree to buy one. The Superbird was designed to bring Petty back to Plymouth after he had briefly defected to Ford, and it was built to win at Daytona and Talladega specifically. Ford's response was to hire Larry Shinoda. Shinoda was one of the most celebrated automotive designers in America. He had been the primary designer of the 1963 Corvette Stingray at General Motors, a car whose shape is still considered one of the defining aesthetic achievements in American automotive history. He had since jumped to Ford, and in 1969, Knudsen gave him a specific assignment: take the completely redesigned 1970 Ford Torino and transform it into a car that could match or beat the Chrysler winged cars at 200 miles per hour on the super speedways. The 1970 Torino itself was already a significant improvement over its predecessor. Ford had completely resculpted the body for the new model year, introducing what automotive writers of the era called Coke bottle styling. Deeply sculpted sides with bulging fenders that pinched at the middle, a dramatically sloped fastback roofline on the sports roof variant, and a long hood that accommodated even the largest V8 engines Ford offered. The car was lower, wider, and longer than the previous generation, sitting on a 117-inch wheelbase. Motor Trend awarded it Car of the Year for 1970, describing the complete package of styling, chassis development, and performance hardware as the most resolved mid-sized Ford had ever offered. Shinoda took that already aerodynamically capable body and pushed it considerably further. The King Cobra, the car that never made it. What Shinoda designed was called the King Cobra, and it was the most radical NASCAR homologation special Ford had ever attempted. The King Cobra featured a dramatically sloped, smooth nose that completely enclosed the grille and bumper area into a single flowing surface, shaped more like the nose of a jet aircraft than the front of a production car. Ford engineers planned removable headlight covers for NASCAR teams to improve aerodynamics further. The roofline of the sports roof body was already better than anything Chrysler was working with in the rear section, but the King Cobra's front end was the most extreme shape Ford had ever developed for a road-legal vehicle. 3 prototypes were built, each with a different engine variant: one with the Boss 429, one with the 429 Super Cobra Jet, and one with the standard 429 Cobra Jet. They were taken to Daytona International Speedway for testing, and at first, the numbers were promising. The King Cobra was fast. The problem was that it had been made fast at the front end without adequately addressing what happened at the rear. The aggressive nose generated downforce, but the rear of the car was producing lift at super speedway speeds, creating a fundamental handling imbalance that made the car unstable at the velocities it needed to sustain to be competitive. 2 simultaneous events killed the King Cobra before the handling problem could be solved. First, NASCAR changed its homologation requirements from 500 to 3,000 production units, making it financially impractical for Ford to build enough King Cobras to qualify the car for competition. Second, Lee Iacocca replaced Bunky Knudsen as Ford president and immediately expressed skepticism about the cost of Ford's racing programs. With the regulations changed, the corporate leadership changed, and the development problems unresolved, Ford canceled the King Cobra. Only the prototype survived, largely forgotten, until one appeared on eBay years later for $456,000, and another crossed a Mecum auction block for $525,000, confirming that what Ford had abandoned was something collectors were willing to pay serious money to possess. What Ford actually sold you in 1970. Here is where the story circles back to the family car. The 1970 Ford Torino that most Americans encountered in showrooms was not a King Cobra prototype. It was a production car available in configurations ranging from a 6-cylinder station wagon through a convertible through a high-performance fastback Cobra, and it sold in genuinely enormous numbers. From 1970 onward, the Torino outsold the Mustang. The car that most people think of as Ford's quintessential icon of that era was consistently beaten in total production by its own family car's stablemate. The entry-level Torino started with a 155-horsepower inline 6-cylinder engine and could be ordered as a 4-door sedan, station wagon, 2-door hardtop, or convertible. This was genuinely the family car of the title, a practical, comfortable, mid-sized American automobile that carried the aerodynamically developed bodywork of a NASCAR homologation program and the name of a car that had just won the manufacturer's championship, completely invisibly in a body that looked like something a doctor or a schoolteacher would drive to work. But the same showroom offered a 429 cubic inch V8 in several states of tune. The standard 429 produced 360 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque. The 429 Cobra Jet produced 370 horsepower and ran the quarter mile in under 14 seconds at over 100 miles per hour. The 429 Super Cobra Jet, with its solid lifter camshaft, 4-bolt main bearing caps, forged pistons, 780 CFM Holley 4-barrel carburetor, engine oil cooler, and optional 4.30 to 1 Detroit locker rear axle, produced 375 horsepower in factory trim and ran the quarter mile in the high 13-second range at over 105 miles per hour. Road tests from the era placed it within striking distance of the Chevrolet Corvette, a car built with no ambition whatsoever toward carrying the school run. The Torino Cobra, which sat at the top of the performance lineup and came standard with a 4-speed close-ratio transmission, a Hearst shifter, a flat black hood treatment, exposed hood pins, and a competition suspension, was the most overtly performance-oriented package. But you could specify the 429 Super Cobra Jet in the Torino GT as well, which gave you the same engine inside a car with hidden headlights, carpeting, padded seats, hood scoop, dual racing mirrors, and a convertible roof option. A family car with 375 horsepower, a solid lifter race engine, and a NASCAR lineage you could trace directly from the chassis to the banking at Talladega. Only 241 Torinos were built with the Super Cobra Jet engine and the drag pack option across the entire 1970 model year. The most capable 429 GT convertibles, with Super Cobra Jet power and the drag pack, are now estimated to exist in single-digit numbers. At the 2011 Barrett-Jackson auction in Orange County, a documented 429 SCJ Torino GT sold for $73,700. Comparable examples today, when they surface at all, regularly push into six figures. Why nobody remembers it. The 1970 Ford Torino occupies one of the strangest positions in American automotive history. It outsold the Mustang. It won 2 consecutive NASCAR championships in the form that Talladega created from its platform. It came within a single design flaw and a regulation change of becoming the most aerodynamically radical production car ever sold through American Ford dealers. It was available with an engine so serious that it came with an oil cooling system, specifically because the factory acknowledged it might otherwise overheat during sustained high-performance use. And it was forgotten almost immediately. Part of the reason is that the Dodge Charger Daytona and the Plymouth Superbird were more visually extreme, and visual extremity anchors public memory more reliably than subtle aerodynamic engineering. A car with a 2-foot nose cone and a wing you can stand under announces itself. A car whose rocker panels were rolled to allow it to run an inch lower than the rules technically permitted does not. The Torino did its work quietly, at a technical level that required context to appreciate. And that context was never provided by a marketing campaign, because Ford had moved on to other priorities by the time the car reached showrooms. In 1970, you could walk into a Ford dealer, order a mid-sized family car with hidden headlights and a convertible roof, specify an engine with a solid lifter camshaft and an oil cooler, and drive home in something whose body shape had been developed in the same aerodynamic program that won David Pearson the NASCAR Drivers' Championship. The car cost $3,270 in base GT trim. It was the school run and the super speedway in the same package, in the same year, and almost nobody, then or since, noticed what they were actually buying.